I'm Julia with Itinerant Literate Books. Welcome to our virtual event for Independent Bookstore Day 2021. It is a young adult panel with Ryan Graudin and Laurie Devore. We're really excited you guys are joining us tonight. Thank you so much. Not only are Laurie and Ryan both young adult authors, they are also local Charleston authors. And we're going to talk a little bit about writing in Charleston as part of our discussion tonight, which we're excited about. And I do want to mention you guys can add your own questions to the chat over on the right-hand side. It's a live chat, and we'll be keeping track of those, and we'll ask them at the end. And now, without further ado, I'm just going to jump into my well, I get really excited about this question. I don't know. But it is Independent Bookstore Day. So I wanted to start off by talking about books or bookstores that have had a big impact on your life from childhood. Of course, a book can have an impact on your life at any time, but I feel like a lot of people on IBD get excited about the classics and the things they grew up with. So I'd love to hear what those are for you. And then if there are any bookstores that were big influences when you were a young adult or an earlier time in your writing life. Yeah, maybe Laurie, do you want to get us started?
Sure, I can give it a try. Yeah, so for me, I read, one of the books that was really influential, as I feel like a lot of people our age, was Harry Potter. But then kind of beyond that, I also really liked a lot of the American Girl books growing up. I used to loudly read like one of those a day. I really enjoyed those. And then also kind of on that same level, there's these books called The Princess Diaries, which were not the Meg Cabot ones, but actually like fake, like historical books.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Yeah, about each of the different princesses. So they had like Anastasia and Marie Antoinette and all that stuff as like, younger children. And I really loved those books. And then also one of the other books I really remember is The Watsons Go to Birmingham, which was one of my favorites. And I just like cracked up the whole time I was reading that. I just really loved that book as well. In terms of bookstores I really loved, I was just telling these guys, I actually live in a pretty rural area, so there weren't a ton of independent bookstores around. So I went a lot of times just to like the Barnes & Noble or the Books A Million. So those were kind of cool places to go and browse the shelves. And then I also lived in Chicago for a while before I moved to Charleston. And I really loved the bookseller up there, which was a great place to, have a glass of wine and read a book. And then, of course, I love Itinerant here in Charleston.
I'm curious, what American Girl doll was your favorite, or like your doll?
So Samantha looked just like me, so that one was my favorite for that reason. So I read all of her books, but I also really like Kirsten. I liked her little pigtails. I really liked those. My grandma actually sewed all the clothes for me. So my parents bought me the dolls, but they weren't going to invest in the wardrobes. But my grandma basically copied from the catalog and sewed all of the clothes from their wardrobes. And my grandpa made like a wooden bed and dresser for them. So I had the whole shebang of like the American Girl outfits and stuff.
That's awesome. I was also a Samantha girl myself. Okay. Yeah, so I also read a lot of the American Girl books. I loved history, you learn so much about different eras through their adventures, which was really cool. But my mom, like when I was 6 or 7, our television broke and my parents just didn't replace it. And so naturally we started reading at bedtime instead of watching TV. So I read a lot of books. But I became obsessed with a particular series called Redwall by Brian Jakes. And basically the main tenet of that series is there are woodland creatures who fight battles. And so like the mice and the squirrels and the hares are the good guys, and the rats and the other vermin are the bad guys. And there's like 20 books in that series. But I became super obsessed with them. And I would save up my allowance, and every few weekends my dad would take me to the Barnes & Noble in West Ashley, and I would buy like the next hardcover. So I would just slowly build my collection over the months, which was great. And then there was an independent bookstore here in Charleston called Chapter 2. It was like right off of Meeting Street. And Brian Jakes actually came and did an author visit there in like the year 2000 when I was 13. And so like that was the first time I got to meet a real life author, and it was really cool.
Yeah. That's so fun. I was excited both about Princess Diaries, both of them that you mentioned, but the Royal Diaries one, I definitely read the Queen Elizabeth and Marie Antoinette. And I was trying to tell one of my friends about the Marie Antoinette one, and you know how it has like the real pictures in there, and they looked at it and they were like, she was ugly. And I cried. I was so upset that they didn't like her. Yeah, but I also was from a small town that didn't have a independent bookstore, which sounds like we all kind of have in common. I mean, Ryan, you were fortunate to have that experience with Ryan, meeting the author. But I feel like that's a large reason, like, why there's been a resurgence maybe of bookstores. Like, a lot of people around our ages were like wanting that, and then we made it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so along the lines of maybe, okay, so I'm going to skip around a little bit. So both of you guys having grown up in South Carolina, I think I have that right, Laurie? You also grew up in South Carolina. Yeah. Do you feel like that has crept into your writing? I mean, maybe both in like literal ways, but also in like less prominent ones, or just writing from the South at all? I don't know. Do you feel like that's been in like the back of kind of where you're writing from?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I was born in Charleston and spent all but 1 year of my life here. And Charleston, I think, it's a very unique city, and that like it has such a sense of place. I'm actually reading The City We Became right now by N.K. Jemisin, and she talks about how cities have souls and become like living entities. And I feel like Charleston has a soul in a way. And so growing up here, it helped me appreciate the souls of like other places that I went to visit, and then how I approach setting. Like, I try to approach all of my settings as a character of their own. And I think that is partly because I grew up in a city that felt like it was living and breathing on its own accord.
Yeah, I mean, for me, mine's a little bit more direct, I think, because I write contemporary books, but all of my books have been set in South Carolina, so it's definitely impacted that in a huge way. And one of the things you'll notice if you read my books is they're all set in different parts of South Carolina, and that's because, you know, I kind of like the idea of exploring the state, and just because I don't think it's a setting that's in a ton of contemporary YA books, it was something that was really important to me to get right, and to get this feeling of what South Carolina is and all the different places that exist within the state. And, you know, that comes with not just the great things about it, but the challenges as well, and kind of fully understanding that. I grew up in a small town, so I think I have a really big fascination with how growing up in a small town affects you, and a lot of, you know, I always kind of find myself sometimes repeating this theme of like wanting to get out of a small town. It's not necessarily because I hate them. I think it's something I keep coming back to because living in a small town played such an important part in my life, and then I left it. So I think that all factors into pretty much all of my books. I have one that's kind of set in the low country, which is a little bit different, but especially my two set like kind of in the upstate of South Carolina and in more rural places. I definitely think that I pull on a lot of what was important to me growing up. And also, I just think that those can become very stereotypical settings in books. So what's interesting to me is kind of challenging the way readers think about them, and making them feel a little bit more well-rounded as my settings, hopefully.
Yeah, no, like, it's funny. I never, people are always like, well, when are you going to write about like Charleston, or when are you going to write about the South? And I always felt more driven to look outward, I guess. But it was finally in the middle grade book we used, this is the Morris Island Lighthouse at Folly Beach. But we also kind of use it to look outward because it becomes a portal to like this magical land and stuff. But it was really fun to start. So my co-author for that book, she's Australian. So I had to teach her what Clough Mud was, and like, you know, saying low country is not 2 words, it's 1 word. And just, you know, all the little idiosyncrasies that only people who are from here would know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Is it fun to put that sort of stuff in there? Like, or have you had to have any like battles with editors about keeping some specific things?
The Clough editor was like, Clough Mud is not a real word, and I was like, yes, it is. And then we had to like figure out how to spell it because it's not in the Oxford English Dictionary, and like that whole thing. But I won my battle, and it's in there. And, Yeah. And then they like tried to make Low Country 2 words, and I was like, this is not, no.
Yeah, I had a copy editor who I wrote that there were gumballs on someone's, like, the bottom of someone's foot, and they're like, what is like, what do you mean, like, chewed gum? And I was like, no, like, gumballs like fall from the tree.
Yep.
Yeah, so I've gotten a lot of leeway for the most part. That one I thought was pretty funny. They were like, what's a gumball? So.
Oh, wow. I feel like, yeah, that's interesting. I feel like the Low Country one comes up fairly often. I don't remember which book, and even if I did, I wouldn't say because, but there definitely is a title that came out on one of the catalogs this year that had Low Country as part of the title as 2 words. And I was like, oh no. I think we still got it, but still. Yeah, that is interesting. It is, since the writing, I mean, there's those like specific things. It can be hard, I think, for people working on it who aren't from there to have those like little insights. So it's fun that you get to assert your, no, I know what it's supposed to be. So speaking of y'all's writing, Kristen had this question, which I really like. I hope you guys like it. It's you guys write 3 different genres. Like Laurie, you do mostly contemporary, and Ryan, your stuff is a lot of fantasy. You're kind of all over the place. Alternate timelines, a little bit of historical fiction in there too. But if you guys were to reverse positions to write the opposite of what you've written, what do you think that story would look like?
Oh my gosh.
If I was going to write a contemporary.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So I always thought it would be fun. So I was a synchronized swimmer, like a competitive synchronized swimmer in high school. And I feel like there aren't many. I don't know of any YA books that like cover that aspect. So I always thought it would be kind of fun to like write a book about that. But.
That would be interesting. Yeah. Is it cutthroat? Is it cutthroat like the ballet? Could you make it into one of those like ballet thrillers, but with like synchronized?
Oh yeah, I mean it's water ballet, so and, you're spending all this time in the pool with everyone who's like super competitive, and everyone's yeah, you could make it that way. Have like a Nancy Kerrigan scene or something with like a nose clip.
Yes. Maybe a seed is implanted.
That really dark, really fast.
I would definitely read about a competitive synchronized swimmer. That's something I don't know anything about. I want to know. I don't know what kind of fantasy I'd write. I think it's kind of, fantasy requires a lot of world building, and I think that would be fun, but it would take me a really long time to prepare for that. But I mean, what I love most about fantasy are the ones that are just like super fast paced and fun and have really complex character relationships. So I think the same thing I love in contemporary, and that's what would be most interesting to me. Ryan, I've actually read Wolf by Wolf and that whole series. So, I mean, I would love to write something like that. I was like, that's such a fun series. I just had a great time reading it. So that's what I love about fantasy. It's having fun.
Yeah. The world building on that series was really tough. Just because of like the emotional intensity. So like being set in an alternate World War II universe, and you spend all of your brain time. I'm sure when you're writing your own books, like you're living in this world like while you're writing it. So for a year or 2 or 3, and so it got really exhausting by the end. I was like, I'm done. But yeah, back to the Low Country.
Yeah, I mean, do you sometimes think you might try to write outside of your genre, or I mean? Or do you even feel like you have a specific genre to write outside of? Or do you think it'd just be too much?
So, yeah, the further along I've gotten into my career, the more I am trying to so I've always wanted to be able to write whatever story I wanted to write and not be put in a box. And so that's kind of where I'm jumping all over the place. But as I've been honing in on okay, what makes a book a Ryan Graudin book, or what makes it special and distinct, and I'm starting to hone in on twisted history or a speculative story, but told with some sort of historical aspect to it. So yeah, I probably stepping outside of that. I would also like to write something that's like purely fantasy. So.
What about you, Laurie?
I mean, for me, I don't know. I still definitely liked pushing the boundaries of what I'm doing. And I've talked to a lot of people as I've gotten a little older. I'm like, I have a lot of interest in writing some adult books and kind of seeing, I think my writing's so geared towards upper YA as it is that I think there's a lot of natural transition over into doing some adults. So that's definitely something that's on my mind. And I do love fantasy stories. I could see one day, and I don't think this is in the immediate future, but, I always see myself pushing my boundaries of what I'm interested in and books I'll try to take on. So in the future, yeah, I could see myself doing a lot of different stuff stories in general excite me, like just watching TV and reading other books. I get a lot of ideas. So hopefully one day that might be something I'm ready to tackle. Probably not yet, but we'll see.
Yeah. So are either both of you working on anything now? And how has that been during COVID with the pandemic? Has it been easier or more? Are you more distracted from everything? Or is it nice being like buckled down at home?
Laurie's like grimacing, so.
Yeah. Well, I wrote a whole book last year during COVID, and I kind of have put that on pause for the time being. So I don't know if that's because I was taking on too much or because of COVID or just in general. I don't know. I find finding time to write really hard no matter when it is. So it hasn't been a huge change for me. I work full time. So it's just like, I'm always, when I finish, like look at the book, like where did this come from? How did this happen? I don't remember spending the time to do this. So it really was not that much different doing it in quarantine for me, except I was home even more than I normally am. But yeah, so I'm working on something new right now, doing research for it, and I've kind of put the other thing in the fridge for a bit as a leftover, I guess. So that's where I'm at. I'm kind of transitioning between projects and my focus and trying to decide how I want things to go next, I think.
Yeah, COVID. So I had just gone through like a lot of stuff in my personal life, like right before COVID happened. And so I had already been having like a really intense time, and then the lockdown hit. And so it actually just like helped me pause. I mean, I do have a toddler at home, and so that was an extra like level of insanity. But I found I was able to like lock myself away in my room and like write for 2 or 3 hours a day. And yeah, so I kind of like kept my momentum with that. But yeah, in terms of what I'm working on right now, I have like 4 different projects in various stages of being finished or not finished. And there's an adult project, there's middle grades, so I feel like all of the writing I'm doing right now is like I have a giant pot of spaghetti and I'm like throwing it at the wall to see what sticks to the wall. Yeah.
Is it nice to like move between the different projects, or like do you like working like that, and for you, Laurie, I mean, do you like switching a lot or?
Yeah, well, sometimes so right now I have this project that I'm working on, and it's Victorian Gothic kind of story, and it's like very dark. Yeah. And so I'm piecing it together very slowly. And then I have this other like middle grade project that's like whimsical fantasy a la like Studio Ghibli, Diana Wynne Jones. And so like they're very opposite of each other. So like if I get tired of one, I can kind of like skip to the other and back and forth. So that's been really fun to play around with.
Yeah, I really focus on one thing at one time for the most part. Just because, like I said, like with my job, I kind of a lot of times have to be kind of thinking way ahead of where I want my publishing career to go at the same time. So I think that's because I have that like sort of limited time, I'll kind of keep my focus on one project as much as I can. There have been times where I'm like, screw this, like I just got to do something else so I can use my brain in a different way. But for the most part, I stay pretty focused. And I mean, but I'll find sometimes I'll go like a couple of weeks without touching something. I just need like a brain break, and I just basically not write. I'll watch TV and like read and kind of recharge that way creatively. So that's normally how I work.
Is there anywhere in the area that y'all like to go to write? I mean, under normal circumstances.
Oh, go ahead, Laurie.
I actually don't have like a super great answer for this. I really like coffee shops. I like Muddy Waters is right down the road from where I live, if you guys are familiar with that coffee shop. So that's probably where I spent the most time in Charleston writing. But I also really like patios, and my computer needs to be plugged in to work. So I have a whole problem with that. But there's a couple places downtown with nice patios that I like to go to sometimes as well.
Yeah, I used to go to the Orange Spot all the time. And in fact, I used to go a lot when it was in the building that Itinerant Literate is in now. So I wrote several books in the bookstore. But now, like, it's with, I try to work while my toddler's napping sometimes, so I like have to be at home. So my desk is in the corner of my bedroom because we have a teeny little cottage. But yeah, another place I have enjoyed going recently is Firefly, because my brother works out there, and they have those nice big tables and stuff, and they're open in the afternoon sometimes. So it's nice to just like go get a cocktail and sit and write.
Yeah, that sounds pretty glorious in general.
Yeah. I know. Once stuff opens up, we should start doing like writers' dates and stuff. Some of my other writers do something called like drink and draft, and it's like only when you're rough drafting, and yeah,
right.
It can be effective. You not while you're revising.
Yeah.
It helps turn off your inner editor and like let the words flow a little more smoothly, because I think especially my brain, I become such a over perfectionist that I'm like, oh my gosh, is this living up to everything that I've written before, which is really dumb because you're still like writing. But yeah, your brain starts to self-sabotage, so alcohol helps with that sometimes.
Yeah. It's always nice if you're, I mean, I don't know, in my experience when I'm writing like a sexier scene too, it's nice to be a little, have a little freedom there. I don't know, glass of wine.
I have a friend who, like, when she writes those scenes, she'll just sit in a closet with a blanket over her head and like run like no one can see me.
I remember being at a coffee shop one time and kind of writing, a little bit of a racier scene, and I was kind of like looking around like, well.
Yeah. It's the perils of the job.
Exactly.
I always sort of wonder about that for people who edit like very, very adult stuff. I'm like, do you do this only at home? Are you out and about editing for this? Yeah.
Yeah, I actually had I remember I had an editor comment on my second book, Winner Take All, which has got a little spice in it, and I was like, that's not what's happening in the scene, this is what's happening, and then I literally wrote under it, I was like, this is a comment I never thought I would write to anyone.
Like, clarify.
To clarify the act happening here.
Yeah.
That's a little teaser for you about that book if you were interested.
I know, everyone grab your coffee. Figure out where she had to leave the weird comment to the copy editor. Speaking of writing, when do you remember when you guys started? Did you both start like at a really young age writing? Have you always, or did pick it up later? How did you get into the writing game?
I mean, I started really early. Like, I don't ever really remember not thinking I was going to write a book. I mean, I would read like a series, and I always would get really into, it sounds like we both did, like we get really into authors when I'd start. So I'd read one book by an author and I'd be like, okay, I have to read all 90 books they published, which is how a lot of those authors are back in the 90s. And so that I would like basically be like, and I'm gonna write my own book, and it would just be a ripoff of whatever series I was into at the time. So magical boarding school, sick kids in love. Those were the sort of things I liked when I was younger. And that was what I would write.
Yeah, I remember my like 3rd or 4th grade teacher like so he would assign like essays every few weeks for the class to do, and mine were always like way off the wall. Like there was one where he told the class like you have to write an essay that like does this like describes doing the steps of something, and so like everyone else was like how to grow a garden, like you plant the seed, you water it, sunshine, it grows, and I was like how to ride a dolphin, and then I went into this whole spiel about how like you get your scuba gear and you like go into the ocean, and then you grab the dorsal fin and then it like goes under into the coral reefs and stuff. And he was like, "This is not a real thing." He's like, "Whoa, slow it." He's like, "You have a very active imagination." I always, I think it was because I loved reading so much that I read. When I was a little bit older, I read Ella Enchanted by Gail Carson Levine, which is like one of my favorite middle grades. And I got to the end and I was like, there has to be a book 2, there has to be a sequel. And I was so disappointed to find out that there wasn't. So I was like, well, I'm going to like write my own not so thinly veiled ripoff of what that is. So like mine also started with like fanfic. But yeah, I had a lot of great opportunities here in Charleston. Like the Charleston County School of the Arts had a creative writing program. So I went there for high school and then went to college in Charleston and majored in creative writing. And always kind of like, I knew that I wanted to be an author, but that was always kind of something that I put in my back pocket because it wasn't practical. But thankfully I had a lot of teachers who were like, no, like you should go for it, and you should, it's a lot of hard work, but it's possible. So I'm grateful that they did.
Yeah. How, what was it like getting each of your first books published? Did you like send out, the one queries, or did you have a friend of a friend, or how did it go down?
I feel like it's usually not the friend of a friend situation. I think that's like a really common misnomer for people who are like, oh, you must know someone in publishing to like get in. Mm-hmm. No, you really just kind of have to pound down the door. Like I sent out I started querying books that like never actually got me an agent. So I sent probably 200 to 300 queries for like one like first round. And then the next round was like another like 50. And I finally landed my agent. But yeah, I got my first contract in 2011 with HarperCollins for a book. And I was at the Mount Pleasant Town Center sitting eating froyo with my friend when I found out. And we were like super excited. And then we went to Kudu to celebrate. So yeah, so local festivities.
Nice. Kudu is actually one of the places I like to write too.
Yeah, I took the outfits out of the walls. It's very sneaky of them.
Yeah. Mine's a little bit different, but I mean only a little bit. I queried, my first book was a college YA, which wasn't really a thing. Still not. I mean, more so now I think you see it, but especially I think I wrote it back in like 2010, I want to say. So I queried that and I ended up connecting with my agent from that book. She didn't take it on to represent it, but I was working on another book at the time. And I was like, hey, I have this other project in the works. And she really liked the college book, but she was like, well, you've got 2 issues. One's the plot and the other is that college YA doesn't really exist. And if it was just one of the problems, we might be able to fix it, but I don't know. And I was like, well, I've got this other book, so let's see, if you're interested in that. And we did a couple of rounds of revisions on that book, and she ended up representing it. And then I did sell that one in like 2015, I think. And then it came out in 2017. This is the publishing industry, if anyone's curious. That's kind of how it goes. Yeah. So that was my first book, How to Break a Boy, which I still think that was not the original title. It's a Fiona Apple song called Criminal, if anyone knows that's where it's from. So yeah, I was living up in Chicago when I found out my first book was going to be published, and I was at like Peace Pizza in Chicago, which I'm sure no one here knows what that is, but it was a pizza place and brewery. And when we got the first offer, my first book actually got 2 offers on it, so that was very exciting. It did not lead to a New York Times bestseller, which I think sometimes people think if you get multiple offers, that's what happens. That wasn't the case. It was still a small book, but that was pretty exciting for me.
Yeah, there's nothing like that moment where like you get that first offer and you realize that like this Word document you've been slaving over for like months and years like is actually going to become a printed book. Like,
yeah,
that's one of like the really high points. Yeah, it's always great.
What are you guys looking? Or sorry, I read the question and then immediately forgot it when I turned it back to you. Are you reading anything right now that you're really enjoying, or is there a book coming out in 2021 that you're really excited about?
I just finished reading the 10,000 Doors of January by Alex Zero. Oh, it's so good. It checked all the boxes for me. Like, it's historical, but it's a fantasy, and it's set in Victorian times, and it's just the writing is gorgeous, and so yeah, I really really enjoyed that. I'm reading The City We Became right now by Invictus, which is it's a really unique and cool idea. And this is the first book by her that I've read, so it's really good. I'll be picking that up.
Yeah, I have a book I'm really looking forward to coming out, but it's cheating because I've already read it. It's called That Weekend by Kara Thomas. It's a thriller coming out in, I'm going to say the wrong date. It's either late June or early July, but it's about a girl who goes on a camping trip with her 2 friends, and she comes back and can't remember anything that happened, and they're both missing. So it's like a great thriller, a lot of twists. I really loved reading that. So I think people are really going to like that one if you kind of like the soapier thrillers. And then I cannot remember the author, but you might know it. I just read Queenie a couple weeks ago, which came out a couple years ago, and I cannot remember the author's name, so I'm so sorry about that, but it's a book called Queenie, and it's like a yellow cover. It's a really beautiful cover, and it's about a young woman who's going through a breakup and how she reacts to that. And I listened to the audiobook, and it was just fantastic, so I highly recommend that.
Do you both get lots of like recommendation requests from friends and family, like when they find out, or strangers when they find out that you're a writer? They're like, what should I read?
Sometimes. Not as much as I'd like.
Yeah, I think it depends. It's more likely that I'll go to people and be like, I just read this great book. Like, I have to tell you about it. And I'll recommend based on like what I know other people like. I did have someone a couple weeks ago who were like, what are some good thrillers I should read? So that was pretty exciting for me because I got to list a bunch.
Let me roll down my scroll.
I always feel like honored when someone asks me for book requests because I'm like, oh, like buckle up. I gotta write some things down. But
yeah, I feel like it's more usually when strangers meet you and they find out that you're an author, they're like, oh, I have this great book idea that you should totally write, and then we'll split the like royalties. And you're like, no, it doesn't work that way. No, thank you.
It's like the conversation you want to walk away from. Like,
yeah.
The other one, I was just gonna say the other thing I always really like that people ask is like, where can I buy your book? Like it's hidden, and I'm like, well, pretty much anywhere.
Yeah. Go to a bookstore. Really? It's in the bookstore? You're like, yeah.
Got it.
I was just gonna follow up on Ryan's comment. If there'd been like a most ridiculous story idea she'd been lobbed. That comes to mind when you.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of like people who are like, it's mostly like people who like are like this picture book, like they have a picture book idea, but it's very much like, I want to teach kids like this, like, so like they think that the teaching of lessons is like the highest part of telling the story instead of like actually telling the story and letting the lessons shine through. I don't know. Yeah. So it's clear, like, you don't understand what writing books is, or what stories are supposed to be for.
Yeah.
I can't really think of any like off. I'm sure it will come to me as soon as this is over.
I always get like you should write my life story. I'm like, I doubt your life is worth writing a book about, but good luck to you.
Oh, wow. That's so bold. I feel like.
Yeah.
I don't know, people really have confidence in themselves, and I admire that about them.
Yeah. That is a very good and diplomatic way to say that. So you kind of both touched on this, but do you have a go-to recommendation for someone that is like, oh gosh, what should I read next? I just like everything.
Well, for me, if it's like someone who loves fantasy and like hasn't read a lot of YA or like really wants to like get into a YA series, my go-to recommendation for them is Laini Taylor's Daughter of Smoke and Bone. Just because I think a lot of times people have this concept that YA is like lesser than, or it can't be literary. Because I spent a lot of time in college and stuff, and they train you to write in a very literary fashion, but they look down upon like what they think of as genre fiction. Like, be like, oh, anything that's fantasy can't be beautiful or have merit. So I'm like, no, read this book. So yeah, Laini Taylor, all of her books are just, they're amazing. The Strangely Dreamer won like the Prince Honor, which is like one of the highest awards you can get in the YA world. But yeah, like that's the first book I hand to people to try to get them hooked.
Yeah, I think it depends on too, like what they're into. So one book, for people who I know are already like fantasy fans or fantasy sci-fi fans, I really like Gideon the Ninth. I've been recommending that one a ton. It's like the most fun book imaginable in that genre. So that's a go-to for me right now. People who like thrillers, I just did an event with you guys with Courtney Summers. Her two latest books are both great thrillers, Sadie and The Project, so I recommend those all the time. And then I'm also a big romance person, so I really love The Royal We, which came out probably like 10 years ago now. It's been quite a while, but The Royal We is always one of my, like, you've got to check this out. It's such a fun book, especially if you're like into the royals at all. It's such a good like royal contemporary, I guess, that kind of steals a lot from real life, but I really love that book too.
I've had Gideon the Ninth on my to-read list. Like, I literally have it here, like in my TBR pile for like 2 years now. And I've got Tamsin the Ninth now too. And I'm like, I'm going to get to these books. I really, really am.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you say they're definitely worth it.
Yeah, they're kind of a wild ride. You have to step back and kind of be willing to not understand things for a while. But then I like went back and reread both of them after I'd read them the first time, and they're just wonderful. They're super fun, but also really smart. I love them. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Do you both reread stuff periodic? I mean, like everyone rereads stuff, I think, but like how much rereading do you do maybe each year? Are you focusing on reading more new things?
I did a lot of rereading this year, especially like with the pandemic, and I think a lot of people did. Like, it's like comfort food. You like want to go back to something that you know when like the rest of your life is so up in the air and there are so many unknowns. So yeah, I went back and reread through a lot of some of my favorite series this year. But now I'm just starting to like branch out again into newer books. I think it's because we're transitioning into maybe hopefully a less COVID-y future. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm the same way. I don't think I reread a ton each year, but I'll kind of get in a mood or just kind of want that comfort book. And I probably do read The Royal We once a year. I just like to like get back into it. That one I really enjoyed the reread of Gideon in particular, because like I said, there's so much more I understood after I'd read the two books. So I think that's really neat when a book can kind of, it opens up to you in a different way when you already know where it's going. So I really enjoyed that. And then like, the Shadow and Bone series is coming out, so I reread The Six of Crows just because I wanted to revisit those characters. So yeah, I do think it's mostly when you need that kind of comforting feeling, and you're like, oh, I forgot how much I just love that writing, and I want to dive back into it. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Speaking of that, have either of you watched it yet? I have not, but I do.
I haven't had a chance. So my husband and I, we watch a lot of TV shows together. So we're hopefully on Monday or Tuesday we'll be able to like dive in. But he's really excited too about it.
Yeah, I watched the first 2 episodes, so I was like, I'm gonna get myself a cocktail after this and jump back into it, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, a good rainy day activity for sure.
Exactly.
Okay, well, I have about one more question, and then we will part our ways for the evening, I think. Okay, so you guys both write in young adult, and Ryan, you mentioned earlier about, young adult being pigeonholed or maybe stereotyped into not being like good genre. Yeah. But it also tends to be pretty ahead of trends, I think. And do you think that do you think, so specifically this past year with a lot of the reckoning that publishing has been trying to do with inequality and representation in the literature, do you think you've seen a big push for that in young adult with your editors and stuff, or do you think there's room for improvement?
I've been really fortunate to a lot of my YA books have come out through Little Brown Books for Young Readers. And even as far back as like 2014, when I first started publishing with them, like they had a very diverse team already, and they were really committed to doing sensitivity reads and all that. So I think my experience has been a little bit unique in that it's been there for a long time. And I know Alvina Ling, she's like the vice president over there, she's really committed to like really fostering editors of color and from all different backgrounds to make sure that that those voices do get out there. I think this is something that a lot of other publishers are just now starting or like really trying to do. And hopefully, I want to say that will like impact change in the future. But I know that a lot of times it's just talk and the actual results don't really work out. So hopefully it will. I do over at Quiltree, which is the Harper imprint, they're also really they're really trying to like build diversity on their team because it starts with the gatekeepers because there are so many talented writers out there from all different backgrounds, and a lot of times they just get shot down because the gatekeepers don't think it's relevant, or they don't think they can connect with the stories. But that's on them. That's not like the readers out there are obviously like really hungry and really wanting to see experiences like theirs between the pages. So
yeah.
I mean, I would say from where we were, especially in terms of the books being published and the authors being published like 5 to 10 years ago, there's been a lot of strides, I think, made in that realm in particularly. But I think structurally there's still a lot of things in place that have a long way to go, and kind of talking about especially the people up in higher up positions, diversifying that branch, especially the executive, and then that has to come from the top down in a lot of places. I think there can be a lot of difficulties sometimes because kind of the blame for certain things will be put on one person when it's really kind of a whole structure backing that up that isn't maybe taking responsibility for some of the things they could be. So I think there's a lot of growth to still happen structurally in terms of righting a lot of the wrongs that it's, I know it's difficult to right the wrongs of hundreds of years, but it's definitely a work in progress. And I think people are hopefully working toward it, but I do think there's still a lot of work to be done, to really, so that when, authors of color or people from marginalized backgrounds are being published, they're being published in a way that lifts them up and doesn't grind them down, essentially, because I don't want all of that onus to always be on authors. And I think that can be a lot of the problem sometimes.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sorry also to end us on a heavier note, but I was intrigued by the question. I think there's also, in young adult, there's a lot of room it just seems like the young children are really interested in being on the front edge of things. I feel like I learn new words from kids in the store all the time. It's great. And I love having that. The audience is so receptive to, being on the forefront of like kind of the newest trends and stuff.
Well, I think like kids, they're just hungry to learn, and they're, it's such an impressionable age that it is important. It's so important to have. One of the books that came out around the same time as The World Between Blinks was Amari and the Knight Brothers. Knight Brothers, but it's like it just exploded because all of these kids were like, look, there's a black kid on the cover, and she looks like me, and she's a heroine that I can really relate to. And actually, B.B. Alston, who is also from South Carolina, who lives in Columbia, so it's been really cool to see his book take off.
Yeah, it looks really sweet. I want one.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that is the end of my questions. Did either of you have any final thoughts you wanted to leave everyone with on Independent Bookstore Day 2021? A big pivotal year as we end up. Yeah, not so sad.
Yes, I mean, I think it's, it's more important than ever to support independent bookstores and not to put too fine of a point on it, but prevent Amazon from taking over the world. I think that's very important. Yes. I rank that pretty high. I also, I love that you guys have the Get Lit book club every month. It's so fun to meet with like-minded people and talk about books. So it's just like, you guys have so many great things you bring to the community. And yeah, I love you guys, and I hope you all had a happy Independent Bookstore Day.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That is we love hearing that people enjoy the book club and the events that we put on. And thank you guys out there who are watching for joining us tonight. And thank you, Laurie and Ryan, for joining us for this Independent Bookstore Day event. We really appreciate it. And we hope, next Independent Bookstore Day, we can see you guys in person at an author panel. It'll be great. Yeah. And have a good evening, everyone. Thanks so much. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Good night.